So I'm sitting here with Joel Carlson, Minnesota blogger, at the Minnesota Bloggers Conference, first ever Minnesota Bloggers Conference. So naturally we're going to talk about your blog. Tell me first how we can find your blog and what it's about and how you started, why you started blogging, how you came to blogging.
You can find my blog at Joel's, Joels Views, Views.com. I started blogging basically when I started doing the Twitter views. It was basically another outlet for me besides having the one-to-one conversation on Twitter. Some people aren't on Twitter or don't get to see the whole conversation going on. So I post basically a transcript on my blog of the conversation so it can be referred to later. In addition to that, what I do is, since I've worked a variety of different fields and have a fair amount of job experience, I talk some about my views of business, how people should work within the office as far as like conduct and so forth like that, and then just basically observations of how people brand things, commercials I see, articles that I've read, and then I make my own, statement on that and post that onto the blog.
Sure. So the Twitter views. Can you explain what a Twitter view is, and then how you start, how you got the idea, how you started, the origins?
Sure. Back in March of this year, I had been just really heavily thinking about social media just in general and how people can share more about themselves without bragging, because as we all know who've been in that, you don't want to just say, I did this today, I did that, because people aren't going to follow you. So I thought, well, how about a conversation or like an interview? Then they can share more, but it's not just them, pushing it. It's a two-way conversation, and you can, make that more interesting. And then my next thought was, well, okay, we could use Twitter as the tool, and it'd be a two-way conversation. And so I started doing that in March. I'm about too short of doing 150 so far.
Wow.
Yeah, quite a few. Got to meet a lot of great people doing that, and like I said, I post after the Twitter view is done. They generally take about an hour. After it's done, I post it to my blog so that it can be referred to later.
Okay, so there's an archive of the transcripts of it, but also they are scheduled events, right?
Yes. Yep.
So when do they occur?
I had been doing them every day, Monday through Friday, but right now, starting this month, I'm going to be doing them Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at generally about 11 o'clock Central Time. And then I'll do a second one on Fridays, usually like about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Okay, and somebody wants to follow them live, how can they do that?
There's a hashtag to follow on Twitter, it's JECTV. And they also can be followed on the Pioneer Press at www.twincities.com/Twitter views.
Okay. So what have you learned from starting the Twitter views and from doing the Twitter views? What is the biggest thing you've learned?
I think that there's just a lot of kind of untapped talent and hidden stories that a lot of people, unless they start asking like you do on Twitter, don't know. I met somebody who had worked for a movie studio out in California. I've gotten to meet a lot of local people with the different news networks, KSDP, WCCO, KARE 11, and got to see more even of a personal side. They can only share so much on TV, but through the Twitter viewing, I've gotten to meet a lot of interesting people that way.
So for blogging, what has been the biggest thing you've learned?
Biggest thing in blogging. I think I've just learned a lot basically in following other people and how they create their own dialogue. And kind of like they've talked about the conference today, you don't really know what your voice is going to be right away, and so you kind of grow into that, and that's, I'm still in that process.
Sure. So what is, both for your Twitter views and for blogging, what has been the most surprising thing that you've come across?
Doing the Twitter views, just sometimes being at groups like this today, someone will say, oh yeah, you're that guy. I had an interesting experience last week where I had been interviewing for a job and didn't know anybody there, and I walked in the office and the person said, hey, you Twitter viewed me. So I was like, oh good, got an in. So that's been kind of neat, and just getting to meet all sorts of people in different backgrounds who without the tool of Twitter, I wouldn't have randomly just walked up to someone in the street and say, hey, how are you?
Right.
Blogging, not only have I just enjoyed, learning how to have a writing technique, but I also like reading a lot and just getting different people's views of what they write about.
Cool. For somebody who's thinking about starting blog, or somebody who's new to it, what advice would you give them? What tips would you give them?
I guess the first thing I would think about is like, what do you want to write about? What are your passions? Because even the most passionate person is going to get writer's block sometimes. So if you say, well, I kind of like this or kind of like that, maybe do a few blog posts about that and just see where that leads you. But I guess if you're going to really be serious about blogging, maybe kind of have as a frame like 3 or 4 topics that things, maybe it's a sport, maybe it's a work field, maybe it's a hobby, and then say, ask yourself, can I seriously write about this enough to, keep an interesting blog? So again, you can be found online at joelsviews.com. And you're on Twitter at Joel E. Carlson. All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk. Nice meeting you.